Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, what I want to do in today's video is take some time to discuss what our topic of monopolies. And I'm going to go through a clear distinction between two types of monopolies. Then we'll talk about how what to understand really the main focus of the monopolistic model that is given to you in your text, and then we're going to conclude by talking a little bit about some big ideas and some thoughts regarding regulation of monopolies and why we uh, do that, why we actively regulate monopolies, even though we allow for their existence. So, the first distinction that I want to make is that between a natural monopoly and what's often called a legal monopoly. Now, both of these represent a situation where the pursuit of some other social goal, because in economics, right, we're always juggling multiple things. One of my favorite quotes is that President Truman often remarked that he wanted only to speak to a one-armed economist because he got tired of his economic advisor saying, well, on one hand this, but on the other hand that. So in economics, we're always juggling multiple things at once, and we're always considering different aspects within that prism. So both a natural monopoly and a legal monopoly represent a a society um, actively choosing through its political processes to pursue some other social goal that, through discussion and debate, has decided a pursuit of that goal outweighs the economic cost of permitting this monopoly. In the situation of a natural monopoly, we have this understanding that the logistical complications that would arise from allowing many competitors would negatively impact the final outcome. A great example of this would be utilities. So, utilities, yes, they absolutely have these enormously high startup costs. Like if we're talking about the generation of electricity from a nuclear power plant or even a hydroelectric dam, right? The startup costs, the barriers to entry in that sort of situation are enormously high. But you also have the logistical complication of, now that you have this source of electrical generation, how are you going to distribute that over the regional area? And if you can stop and think for a second, if we were to allow, five or six different utility companies within the same zip code, uh, the logistical complications would just be an absolute nightmare. You would, for example, can you imagine five or six different electrical companies within one zip code all running their utility lines and power lines and telephone lines, all over having to overlap and crisscross and zigzag through each other, so that, right, like in the simple situation of a windstorm comes through, right? What happens? How do you resolve that situation when a windstorm comes through and knocks down a couple power lines? Now you have a situation where you've got two companies with broken lines, and they need to get permission from the other four companies that are also repairing their own lines, but probably in different areas. They need to get permission from those other four to go up and fix their own lines, because at a certain point, these two companies are going to have to touch the power lines of the other four. It would be a logistical and legal nightmare. So, in those situations, right, we say, look, the generation of electricity and the simple distribution of this very real good vastly outweighs the perfect competition idea that we talked about in module 4 and that we talked about in module 3 of that perfect equilibrium point. Yes, in theory, you could have your electricity companies distribute this electricity and prices would be lower for everyone. But that neglects to take account of the reality, which is the costs of the kind of legal warfare that would obviously ensue between these companies. That would almost completely outweigh the economic benefit that consumers might receive through lower prices. So that's just a great example of a natural monopoly. And again, why we allow a natural monopoly with the understanding that we are actively pursuing some other social good that we believe is more important than lower prices. The second type of monopoly that I want to bring to your attention that, again, we allow is that of what's called a legal monopoly. And a legal monopoly is always wrapped up into the protection of this umbrella term of intellectual property. And this is admittedly a hot topic these days. Whether the US patent system or office should be reformed is, certainly a debate that we as a nation are going to have at some point. But it is not something that I'm going to be able to resolve in an 11-minute YouTube video. But the idea here is that we want to encourage innovation. We want to support the rule of law where people are rewarded for their hard work. We have the 13th Amendment that kind of talks about that issue. And so in pursuing this good, that people should be able to receive the fruits of their labor, we allow for legal monopolies through things like patents, trademarks, and copyrights. The second point that I need to bring up to you concerns the graph. I want to make an important distinction in the graph that for the model of a monopolist, you have to remember that the monopolist is able to separate. It has two distinct curves for its marginal revenue curve and the market demand curve. In perfect competition, they're one and the same because we hold that all firms are price takers. But in a monopolist situation, the monopolist is able to leverage their position over the entire market, operate as a price setter. And therefore, graphically in the model, we have to make that distinction between the market demand curve and the firm's or the monopolist's marginal revenue curve. So make sure you clearly understand that point. The final point that I want to bring up with you today is this issue of regulation of a monopolist. And without going too deep into the weeds, what I will simply say is regulating a monopolist fundamentally requires us as a society, through our political institutions and our processes, to answer a fundamental question. Do we want a society based on might makes right, where the monopolist can do whatever they want and we just hope it works out for the best? By the way, we've tried this theory before. This idea that firms would regulate themselves for the benefit of society. And it gave us the 2007 housing collapse and the 2008 Great Recession. Do we want a society that operates in that nature? Or do we want a society that is infused with the idea of equity, oriented toward the goal of justice? And in answering that question, which type of society you want, that then presents a list of options available to any society that is having this question. Which tool do we want to use in order to address the fundamental question at play here, which is what type of society do we want to live in? So think about all these kind of big ideas as you're going through the discussion for this week. Again, always feel free to reach out to me if you ever have any questions or concerns. I'm always here and happy to help. Thanks so much. Have a great day.